Governments love to claim their mission is to create financial freedom for their citizens, speaking endlessly about stability, progress, and opportunity. Yet, when you look at history without the comforting lens of propaganda, what emerges is not liberation, but control. Because from the fall of ancient empires to the rise of modern democracies, those in power have always relied on the same hidden financial mechanisms that quietly drain the wealth of ordinary people while consolidating it in the hands of a privileged few. These methods are rarely new. They are ancient strategies given new names and dressed in modern language, recycled century after century with the same purpose: to keep the majority dependent while the elite grow richer. Among all these mechanisms, inflation stands as the oldest and most effective trick of them all, because whenever a government spends beyond its means, it faces a simple choice: either raise taxes openly and risk public outrage, or quietly devalue its own currency, reducing the true worth of every coin and note that people own. Ancient Rome perfected this deception when emperors, desperate to fund their armies, began diluting the silver in their coins until the once valuable denarius became mostly copper coated with a thin layer of silver. To the naked eye, nothing seemed wrong, but the effects were devastating. Prices surged, savings vanished, and wages failed to keep pace, creating an invisible tax that punished the working class while the empire pretended nothing had changed. And though millennia have passed, the same silent theft continues today, executed not by imperial mints, but by modern central banks manipulating money supply and interest rates under the comforting disguise of economic management. During the Middle Ages, kings and queens refined the art of financial control through what they called forced loans, where monarchs in England, France, and Spain demanded contributions from merchants' guilds and landowners, presenting it as patriotic duty or loyalty to the crown. These loans were never voluntary. Refusal often meant confiscation or imprisonment, and repayment, if it ever came, was made in debased currency or through false promises. The wealthy were stripped of their capital to fund royal wars and palaces, while the illusion of duty made submission feel noble. This coercion disguised as patriotism became one of history's longest-running financial illusions, a tactic that governments still use today, only now framed as responsibility to society, or the national interest. By the 17th century, the deception had evolved into a full system. When Britain created the Bank of England in 1694, it was not an act of generosity toward the people, but a desperate move to finance wars with France. Wealthy investors lent money to the crown in exchange for guaranteed interest payments funded by new taxes on basic goods such as salt, beer, and cloth. The rich earned steady, risk-free profits, while the working class paid the bill. That moment laid the foundation for the modern financial order, where lending to governments remains the safest investment, yet those returns are always underwritten by the labor, consumption, and compliance of ordinary citizens who have no say in how their money is spent. In the modern age, the pattern remains the same, but the language has grown more complex. Governments run vast deficits, selling bonds to banks, corporations, and foreign investors, telling voters the debt will build schools, roads, and hospitals, yet much of it flows toward defense contractors, corporate subsidies, and political bailouts. When the repayment comes due, cuts never begin at the top. Taxes rise, currencies weaken, and public services shrink. The illusion persists that debt exists to help the people, but in truth it chains them to a system where profits travel upward and costs trickle down. The 21st century gave us a new twist on the same scheme through bailouts, where failure became a profitable business model. In 2008, reckless banks nearly destroyed the global economy, and when their bets collapsed, taxpayers rescued them under the promise of saving the system. The result was predictable. The culprits survived richer than before, while ordinary citizens bore the cost. The phrase, "too big to fail," was sold as stability, but it meant the opposite: privatized profits and socialized losses. Even pension systems, often presented as the cornerstone of social safety, hide the same deception. For generations, workers in developed nations have paid into government-managed funds believing their contributions are safely stored for retirement. But in truth, most of that money is spent immediately, replaced by IOUs that depend on future taxpayers. It is a slow-motion Ponzi scheme that can only function when populations and economies grow endlessly. And when that growth falters, governments respond with reforms. Smaller benefits, later retirement, and the slow erosion of value through inflation. The trick is not outright theft, but the illusion of stability, a comfort so deeply ingrained that few question it until it's too late. At every turn, language serves as camouflage. Inflation becomes growth, forced loans become duty, national debt becomes investment, bailouts become stability, and pension cuts become reform. Words mask the reality that power depends on perception, and the less people understand, the easier they are to control. Economic ignorance is the true fuel of every financial deception, and history repeats because most people never learn to recognize the pattern. In the wake of the 2008 crisis, central banks introduced a phrase that sounded harmless: quantitative easing. It promised recovery, stability, and opportunity, but behind the jargon, it was simply money creation on a massive scale. Trillions were printed and poured into the financial system through the purchase of government bonds and mortgage securities. The result was predictable. Asset prices soared, stock markets boomed, and property values exploded. But since most people don't own large amounts of these assets, the benefits went almost entirely to the wealthy. The system was saved, but only for those at the top. For everyone else, wages stagnated while living costs climbed, proving that money creation can rescue the elite while quietly deepening inequality. Stealth taxation completes the circle. Instead of increasing income taxes, governments rely on indirect methods such as sales taxes, fuel duties, and above all, inflation. Every time prices rise faster than your paycheck, your savings lose value, your labor buys less, and your wealth quietly transfers upward. Inflation is not an accident. It is deliberate policy that allows debts to shrink invisibly while citizens bear the hidden cost. You may feel richer because your salary is higher, but if everything around you becomes more expensive, that growth is nothing but an illusion, carefully maintained to keep you content while you lose ground. Regulatory capture is another layer of the same manipulation. In theory, regulations protect the public from corporate greed, but in practice, industries shape the rules that govern them. The railroads of the 19th century, the oil empires of the 20th, and today's tech and finance giants all rewrote the laws in their favor. Governments appear to act as referees, yet they serve as business partners for the most powerful players. The illusion of protection keeps the public calm, while behind the scenes, the same handful of corporations design loopholes that keep competitors small and profits large. War finance follows the same rhythm, disguised as patriotism. During the World Wars, citizens were encouraged to buy war bonds, told they were supporting victory and protecting freedom. They were, but they were also enriching investors who profited from those bonds, guaranteed by future taxpayers. The pattern never changed. Modern wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were financed through debt, feeding defense contractors and banks while leaving citizens to pay for decades. Wars are presented as temporary emergencies, but their economic impact outlives the soldiers who fought them, sustaining industries that depend on endless conflict. The final and perhaps most insidious trick of all is complexity itself. Today's economies are deliberately opaque, buried under jargon and mathematical fog so thick that even professionals struggle to see the full picture. Tax codes stretch for thousands of pages. Budgets are written in acronyms, and financial instruments are designed to confuse. Complexity is the modern camouflage. When the public cannot understand how wealth moves, it cannot protest where it goes. In ancient Rome, Debased coins were physical proof of deceit. Now, deception hides inside spreadsheets, algorithms, and policy language that only insiders can decipher. The system doesn't need secrecy when it has confusion, and all of this matters now more than ever because inflation continues to erode savings, public debt rises without limit, and governments still use the same reflexive solution of printing money and passing the cost to the people. Central banks manipulate currencies in the name of stability, yet each intervention makes real wealth harder to achieve. It's not a conspiracy. It is the predictable outcome of a system designed to protect itself. History teaches that though the tools change, the direction never does. From the debased coins of Rome to the digital debt of today, the burden always falls on the same shoulders: yours. The painful truth is that most people will never escape these traps because they don't even see them. They think inflation is just bad luck, taxes are necessary, and government aid is kindness, trusting headlines instead of studying history. That blindness is the most powerful trick of all, because ignorance keeps the game alive. A population that doesn't understand money will always serve those who do. So what can you do? Never accept government language at face value. When you hear words like stimulus, reform, or growth, ask who benefits first and who pays last. Build real assets that exist outside their reach. Skills, knowledge, and stores of value that can't be inflated away. And, above all, remember that systems protect themselves, not you. They adapt, evolve, and repeat. History doesn't mirror itself perfectly, but its patterns are merciless, and the same financial illusions that drained the wealth of Roman citizens are still draining yours. Only now they're digital, global, and invisible. The only defense is awareness. Once you recognize the illusion, you stop playing by their rules. Governments don't make people free. Understanding does. And if you pay attention, history will reveal every trick they've ever used, because the patterns are all there, waiting for those willing to look beyond the headlines. If this opened your eyes, stay alert, stay informed, and never stop questioning, because as long as you're watching, they can't keep the game hidden forever.